I don't want no oil spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus. Hello to everyone on the internet, wherever and whenever you are, and hello to our people listening on Pacifica stations. Welcome to For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about it in the ways that it affects you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your family and your coworkers and the migrating birds and the fish that are swimming upstream right now. I noticed on the way in there were already some fishermen out there in the mighty Maumee trying to get some fish, even though the water's kind of high, so it's not that great a year for the fishing runs. But welcome to those folks, and like it or not, you know, all of us, the fishermen, the fish, the birds, you and me, we're all wrapped up together on this wonderful planet called Earth. And we have a wonderful show for you today. We're going to be chatting just for the next 10 minutes or so, and about any topic. And you're feel free to call in at 877-909-1007. That's 877-909-1007. Or you can you can text 419-973-5841. That's 419-973-5841. Anytime during the hour, and we'll get your text right away there on the air. So after we chat, then we have a really interesting interview lined up today. We're going to be interviewing Dr. Kurt Panter from Bowling Green State University, and he does research on Antarctic undersea volcanoes. So he got back from a big trip down there and published a paper about what he found under the ice in Antarctica in terms of volcanic eruptions. So that sounds interesting. Then we'll hear from our patrons, to whom we are eternally grateful. And Rebecca will be calling in. Those of you watching this on YouTube already noticed that Rebecca's not with me this morning. She's feeling a little under the weather, but she's going to be calling in just after 10:30. And her topic today is artichokes. So we'll see what she has to say about that. And after Rebecca's portion, we're going to be looking at ecological notes, ecological news from around the world. And we have a mix of good and bad this week. You know, I hate it when the weeks are all doom and gloom. But we have a good show lined up for you today, some good news. And as I've said, hopefully at some point we're going to hear from you at 877-909-1007. Okay, well, some interesting things that have happened during this past week. One thing, of course, this was the 15th anniversary of the Fukushima nuclear disaster. And in response to that, HBO did a documentary on Fukushima, which is very interesting. And, you know, I watched it last night and I recommend it. It's good. I do have a little bit of criticism of it, though, is that it focused on the emotional impact of Fukushima. I mean, it was interviewing people who were actually there in the control rooms as the nuke plants were melting down and exploding. And it was all very, it had some very dramatic footage, which I've never seen before. It actually had a photo of the legendary car battery bank. Those of you who kind of followed the Fukushima nuclear disaster, you might remember that once the entire plant lost power and it went completely dark in there, they had no control over any of the instruments. They couldn't even read the instrument panels. Everything was completely black. So what they did was they got 10 car batteries, and they linked them up in series to get up to 120 volts. And then they used the power from those car batteries to power the instrument panels. And that's how they were able to read as the pressures increased. And they weren't actually able to do much. They couldn't activate the pumps. There was no power to activate the pumps, but at least that's how they got some basic information about what was happening. Not that they shared that information with public officials. One of the people they interviewed on this was the prime minister at the time. His name's Nan, and they didn't actually tell him that the plants were about to blow up, even though they had the pressure reading, so they knew that they were. And Nan, basically, they also didn't focus enough on the aftermath. They had a little bit of, they put some words up on the screen saying that that at least one worker died from radiation, which was good because, to this day there's still misinformation that nobody died at Fukushima. And they also pointed out that a lot of the people who had worked there during the crisis have since died of cancer, which is a lot further than many public institutions or TEPCO Corporation are willing to go. But they didn't point out that Nan, the prime minister that they interviewed about his reactions during the crisis, has become, and ever since then, has been very clearly anti-nuclear. And it looks like Kurt is definitely going to be joining us. So as I said, they didn't really focus in on the aftermath, and the biggest thing they didn't focus in on was the fact that that there is no after, that the crisis is still ongoing. They kind of gave the false impression that somehow all the actions of all these heroic people managed to somehow avert the crisis, avert the worst possible meltdown that could have rendered all of Japan uninhabitable. They did prevent the absolute possible worst. They managed to get water on the spent fuel pools that would have, if they had melted down, then yes, the whole island of Japan would have been uninhabitable. But they didn't mention that the place is still a disaster, that they're still dumping radiation into the environment every day, that if the pumps ever were to stop over the molten cores, that they would again melt down some more and explode again. The disaster is still going 15 years later, and you really didn't get that impression by listening to or watching this documentary. But it still has a lot of good information, and it's very dramatic. And like I said, they focused on the human, the emotional impact of the whole thing on people's families, on their mental health. And from that point of view, it was very valuable to watch. So I do recommend it. Oh, and the one of the most valuable things was they showed pro-nuclear Japanese propaganda before and after. Like they showed the little cartoons that Japanese kids grew up watching, of like with characters like plutonium, a cute little anime type figure that was like, "Oh, I'm your friend and I'll be with you always." Yeah, that's kind of chilling for anyone who understands that plutonium's deadly for 200,000 years. But that was before, and then after Fukushima, there was a long period where Japanese did not want nuclear energy, and even the government was saying they were going to wind it down and get rid of it. But what has happened since then in the last few years is that exact same propaganda machine has ramped back up again, and it has managed to convince at least some Japanese that they want nuclear power again, although it's probably not a majority at this point. But they had, the very end, they had a little cartoon figure, a little anime cartoon figure representing nuclear power, really cute little cartoon figure broadcasting to children and saying, "I'm your friend." So it's like, once again, they didn't learn the lesson, and I think that came through very clearly in this documentary. So, like I said, it's valuable to watch, and of course, as you know, if you're a regular listener, you know that we noted Fukushima Day. We noted the March 11th anniversary of the disaster by going through unplugged nuclear power, which is where we boycotted nuclear energy or boycotted grid power for that 24-hour period of March 11th. And that went pretty well this year. And for those of you who are going to be watching on who watch on the YouTube, you're going to see a little bit of video on that right now. And our producer asked me to pause for just a second so that he could insert that here.
Hello. So, March 11th is the anniversary of the Fukushima nuclear disaster. This year, 2026, is the 15th anniversary of that disaster. And like many households around the world, we're going to be participating in Unplugged Nuclear Power, which is a 24-hour boycott of grid power, which is in protest against nuclear energy and in remembrance of the victims of Fukushima, past, present, and future. So what we're doing in my household is we're participating at level 4, which means we're going to try to put more power on the grid using our 6 kilowatt solar system than we take off that day. And so as part of that, we're going to do very severe conservation. We're going to turn off all our circuit breakers for all our unessential circuits. And so let's just go ahead and do that. Let's hop on down here. We already looked ahead of time to see which ones were essential. And of course, this one is the one that connects the solar panels, so that's essential. We'll keep going here. Let's see, we're going to leave, all we're really going to leave on is the sump pump and the furnace and the solar panels. So let's see, we're almost there. Oop. Sorry, that was actually one of the essential ones. And there. All right, so for 24 hours, we're going to use as little electricity as possible, and we're going to put as much power onto the grid as we can with our solar panels, and hopefully we'll put more on than we take off. There's 4 levels. Anybody can join at level 1, which is simple conservation. Level 2 is severe conservation, like we're doing here. Level 3 is disconnect from the grid. Don't do that unless you have backup power for your essentials like your sump pump and your refrigerator. And then, of course, we're at level 4, which is put more power on the grid than we use, because ultimately that's what's going to do in nuclear power is distributed generation. People putting solar on the rooftops eventually will close all those terrible nuke plants, and we will never have another disaster like Fukushima again. Thank you. Bye. All right, it is midnight on the night of March 11th, and the 24 hours of unplugged nuclear power is over. March 11th was the 15th anniversary of the Fukushima nuclear disaster, and like many households, we boycotted grid power for this past 24 hours as a protest against nuclear and to remember the victims of Fukushima, past, present, and future. Our household participated at what's called level 4. That is, we attempted to put more power on the grid than we used during the day through our solar panels, which, of course, solar is one of the clean alternatives to nuclear that we should be pursuing instead of nuclear. And our household, according to the meter, we used 2 kilowatt hours of power from the grid, and our solar panels, we put 6 kilowatt hours onto the grid. So we succeeded in being a net solar energy producer on this day, which marks the terrible tragedy for mankind, really, in terms of radioactive pollution that's going to be harming our descendants for the next million years, unfortunately. So thank you to everyone who participated at whatever level. Level 1, simple conservation. Level 2, severe conservation. Level 3, grid disconnect. Or level 4, net energy producer. Thank you. And we'll be back next year. So thanks for participating in Unplugged Nuclear Power 2026.
Okay, so now we're ready. Now we're ready to talk to Kurt Panter. Hello, Kurt. Are you on the air?
I sure am.
Okay.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Good talking to you. All right, so let's start out with let's just repeat your name, please, and who you're with.
Yeah, my name is Kurt Panter, and I'm a professor at Bowling Green State University. Specialty is in basically studying volcanoes.
Excellent. And you went on an adventure that few people ever get to do there. You actually went down to Antarctica, right? To study seamounts. Could you tell us just a little bit about that trip and what you found?
Yeah, my specialty is looking at volcanoes, and it's been mostly focused on volcanism in Antarctica. And it's mostly been focused on volcanism and volcanoes that exist on land in Antarctica, including the southernmost active volcano on Earth, Mount Erebus. But this expedition was actually to look at volcanoes we can't see. These are ones that lie at thousands of feet below the ocean surface. So these are all volcanic seamounts that are close to the other land-based volcanoes in the southern portion of the Ross Sea.
Aha. And
Yeah.
so how are these volcanoes formed? Are they? Yeah, is it like a rift valley or is it?
Yeah, no, good question. So the reason that I'm interested in all the volcanism is exactly that, is why are they there? What is creating the magmas? What is controlling how they erupt and where they erupt? And so this is a rift valley, exactly. This is similar to what we see in the East African rift, so where we have Kilimanjaro and Mount Kenya, where the crust and the mantle below it are stretching and thinning, which causes hotter material deeper in the Earth to rise up close to the surface and melt. So this is called the West Antarctic Rift System, and extends over 3,000 kilometers within Antarctica. So it's equivalent to the East African Rift System, or in the U.S., equivalent to the Rio Grande Rift Basin and Range of the western United States.
Aha. Yeah, 6,000 kilometers. That's a very long chain of volcanoes. And so...
Yeah, and what's really interesting about a lot of these is in Antarctica, of course, some of them are beneath the ocean, but also a large amount are beneath the ice sheet, and this particularly the West Antarctic ice sheet, which has been a subject of a lot of focus, scientific focus, to look at understanding climate change and ice loss from the continent of Antarctica.
Yeah, and so that's a pretty interesting question. How are these volcanoes interacting with ice, fire and ice there?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we were trying to look at. Of course, what we're looking at are seamount volcanoes, again, beneath the ocean. That is the ocean today. But we know from many other pieces of evidence that this area of the ocean within Antarctica was filled with ice in the past, and many, many times with ice. So when the climate was cooler and the ice sheets expanded and they filled the ocean with ice, and then, of course, then they melted back during warmer times, and then, again, colder times filled the ocean again to the seafloor, where the ice was on the seafloor. So when those times when the ice was grounded on the seafloor and was over 500, 600 meters thick, very thick continental ice sheet, we had volcanism. And this is, we think, is the first documented subglacial volcanism that has been recorded on the seafloor.
Huh. So that's pretty interesting. So obviously it must melt the glaciers right in that local area. Does that have a larger impact on the whole glacier?
Yeah, that's a very important point. So most of the glaciers that are being studied right now around Antarctica and even Greenland is worrying about warmer water coming into the base where the glacier is grounded on the seafloor, but then it extends out and is floating further out. So when warmer water gets beneath that portion of the glacier, the ice shelf is what it's called, then melting of that accelerates, and that allows more ice then to accelerate from land into the ocean, and that's kind of a cascading effect that could raise global sea level. But part of the whole equation is not just warmer ocean water, but what heat is being contributed to the base of glaciers from the crust, and particularly from hot point source volcanism. Mm-hmm. And so by looking at these seamounts that now are in the ocean, but we have a particular class of seamounts that we think were subglacial based on their morphology, their shapes, and other characteristics. And so to understand when those were formed by dating the rocks, we can understand when the glaciers were there, and possible a feedback between volcanism. So volcanism can drive melting of the base of glaciers and destabilize glacial ice. But at the same time, glaciers can suppress volcanism by their weight, pushing down on the crust and keeping that magma from seeping to the surface. So we want to understand what kind of feedback mechanism is occurring in this portion of Antarctica between ice and volcanism.
All right. So these seamounts, these undersea volcanoes, do they have? How do they interact with the life in the Antarctic Ocean? Do they?
That's also a real good question. Well, in a lot of ways, seamount volcanism is a refugio for life. So it is a kind of an area where life can thrive, and it can thrive because not only the warmer conditions when a volcano is recently or currently active, but also the nutrients that come up, and particularly the sulfur dioxide, which comes off of the volcanic gases as the magma comes to the surface. It bubbles and vesiculates, and sulfur dioxide is one of the main gases that come off. And there's bacteria that eat sulfur, and then of course that feeds up the food chain and creates the ecology that can exist on the seafloor. And so that can be very, very, very important in stimulating life on the seafloor.
Okay. And also, it seems some of these volcanoes are forming islands too, right, off in the ocean there. How important are those islands?
Well, islands of different sizes. The area that we were studying has two kind of small islands, and then just to the south of that area is where the Mount Erebus, which is on a larger island called Ross Island. So Mount Erebus is one of three main volcanoes that form Ross Island. So that's a very large island with an active volcano on it. So the islands, of course, are created by more and more magma coming to the surface and erupting. And if enough volume of magma comes to the surface and erupts, then you can build above the ocean. And so we see that, of course, currently with Hawaii. The large island of the Big Island of Hawaii is currently erupting and still building above the ocean. But as you go back along the chain towards Maui and then eventually Kauai, the islands get smaller, and then they go to submarine as you keep going further to the west. And that's a combination of magma not being produced anymore, subsidence because of the heat being taken away from that area, so it's kind of sinking back in the ocean, as well as erosion from the ocean itself and ocean currents. So the islands are there because there's just enough magma being in Antarctica being produced to build up and construct these volcanoes above the ocean.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's several different types of volcanoes, right? I mean, and some different types of eruptions too. I mean, I think your article mentions mud volcanoes. So people might.
Yeah. So one of it's important. So yeah, volcanoes, depending on the amount of magma that comes up and how gas rich they are, can determine if they're explosive or non-explosive. And so a couple interesting findings was, one, we found that most of the volcanoes that we sampled, and we sampled these by dredging the ocean bottom, pulling up the rocks, that those rocks indicate that they were mostly explosive activity. So instead of just lava flows, magma flowing on the seafloor as little rivers and solidifying, these were explosive and fragmenting and granulating and being broken up material. And that is something that was very interesting. It relates to some deeper processes that we find very interesting. But you mentioned the mud volcanoes. Some of an expedition, not too long ago, did a lot of surveying of the ocean bottom. So we mapped the ocean bottom by sonar, and also sub-ocean by seismic, by vibrations that go through the crust. And their conclusions in a paper published a couple of years ago were these particular type of volcanoes that we think are subglacially formed, that they were mud volcanoes. So something that you would see with gas seeping up from maybe hydrocarbons from oil in the crust, releasing some gas, and that bubbles up, and you get this mixture of mud on the ocean bottom. Well, when we first sampled the ocean bottom on these particular seamounts, the material we brought up was all volcanic. So, and then more sampling, everything was volcanic. So these are not related to hydrocarbon seeps, but these are related to explosive volcanic eruptions. And we think their unusual shape, which looks like mud volcanoes that are very common in the Gulf of Mexico, where there's lots of oil, of course, being derived from there, that the shape that makes them look like mud volcanoes is because they erupted and melted the base of a glacier and erupted in a cavity or a vault or a cave, if you will, where they're restricted in their shape and their size is restricted by the amount of ice they melted when they were erupting.
So they got kind of shaved off by the glaciers.
Well, actually, just think of a cave, and then you erupt in that cave. It'll be a water-rich cave, and then the material erupted would be restricted from expanding out. It would just be within that cave form. And then the glacier moving across it when it melts or when it advances could also erodes it and also changes its shape a little bit.
Okay. I wanted to ask you, our guest last week actually was a lawyer with Earth Justice, and they're fighting a plan to actually mine seamounts, sea volcanoes off the coast of Alaska. Would you have a comment on that idea?
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about it. Actually, I saw something on, I forgot what the program was, but it was in near Indonesia where they were mining. Of course, they're wanting to mine these things called manganese nodules. I'm not sure exactly if that's the case in Alaska, but manganese nodules because they contain a lot of metals and precious metals that are being used now in our technology, and they're becoming more and more viable to do that. These are very expensive operations, and the economics are they have to be, it has to be worth the material that they get for the expense they put into doing it. So there's certainly lots of reserves. So thinking of just the economics, there's lots of reserves of these types of deposits on the seafloor. I think my impression is this is pretty unregulated, and if you're in, of course, international waters, then the regulations get even less certain, and the impacts are kind of unknown, like a lot of these things that we go into, and we go into big time production of this, then it's going to affect things like obviously local seafloor substrates and any ecology that's on the seafloor. It's potentially could add a lot of turbidity, so a lot of material into the water column, which could potentially upset some of the balance within the water column. I don't know enough about it, but it seems like it's a pretty drastic approach to mining, from my opinion.
All right. Well, thanks. Just two more things. One, I guess you're going to be giving a public talk on this. I believe it's on the 25th.
Yeah, on the 25th, Wednesday the 25th at 6 p.m. at the Wood County Library in Bowling Green, Ohio. And it'll be a talk that'll be kind of a travel log, but also a little bit of the science that I've been talking about as well. And encourage anyone that wants to come and see that, and that would be great. And hopefully I'll have one of the students. I took two students, master students from Bowling Green State University, with me on the expedition, and that was like in the 65 days at sea, sailing out of New Zealand and then back to New Zealand into Antarctica. So they're working on their thesis and as well, theses, and hopefully we have a good showing and show a lot of pretty pictures.
Okay, and just finally, anything you'd like to add that we haven't covered?
Let me see. Well, I guess one thing that was another just scientific discovery that's, I think, important, or we're excited about at least, is that we found two of these seamount volcanoes, very small ones, and they think they have been very, very recently active. Now, from a geologist's point of view, recent is a bit relative. We think they've been active within the last 10,000 years.
Okay.
Which is very, very recent. But we're still working on some of the evidence, but we think one might have been active much shorter time period than that.
All right. Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Panter, and we'll look forward. We're going to try to make it to that event on the 25th. Sounds fun.
Yeah. Okay, that'd be great. Please do. Again, thanks again for talking with me and letting me share my what we've been finding.
You're welcome. All right. So that was our interview with Kurt Panter. If you have any comments or questions, of course, you're welcome to call in 877-909-1007. And we actually got a text as we were talking with Dr. Panter. Hey, Joe, I also participated in and unplugged at the nuclear power at level 2, which meant severe conservation. I think we need to do this more often. It's from a fellow named Patrick Moore. So thank you for your participation. And I think doing the unplug thing where you boycott grid power, it really teaches you something about what we're using power for that's essential and what we're using power for that we really don't have to use that. It's kind of a choice to use it. So valuable lesson, I think. All right. So now we get to thank our patrons. And our patrons are wonderful people who've gone to patreon.com. That's Patreon. There they searched for For a Green Future. Up popped our Patreon page. They scrolled through looking at the different membership levels, chose a level that matched their budget, and lickety-split. They became patrons, wonderful people, highly intelligent people, I have to say. Every patron that we've got is like way above average in intelligence, I would say. And so now every month a little tiny bit comes out of their accounts, depending on how much they chose to give, comes over to us, and that's how we can afford to keep this show on the air. So thank you to our patrons. Okay, Jared, have we got Rebecca on the line yet? Yes, all right. Rebecca, hey, welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you.
Hope you're not feeling too poorly.
Yeah, well, we'll know for sure that it was mold and not just the bacteria. If I get way sicker after that, because I'm coming to you live from my basement.
Ooh, okay. All right. So, well, then we won't keep you on too long. But so, what are we talking about today?
Okay. Well, Thursday is Artichoke Day. So, therefore, I'm doing this segment, which we both agreed should be called Artichokes 3 for $1.
Yeah,
because I'm really a joke too.
That was a very old, very corny sketch that that we used to do when I was a Boy Scout. We won't repeat
so
it
naturally,
here.
I gravitate towards it because it's corny.
It is very corny. Okay. All right. So, what about artichokes?
Okay. Well, my personal experience with artichokes is that I was forced to sample one in the 1970s because my parents went over to somebody's house for dinner and I came with them. And they were strange looking things. It's got sort of a alien egg vibe to them, but it turns out that they are actually edible thistle flowers, flower buds. Yeah, and they're really good dietarily. They got fiber, minerals, and antioxidants. California and Italy are both big producers, and they aid with heart health, digestion, liver health, and they lower your cholesterol and blood sugar. So all good things.
Who'd have thought the
leaves and flowers. Yeah, kind of. Sorry, I got a cough. Hold on. Mold. Lots of mold down here.
Okay.
So you eat the leaves and the base back, actually, mostly. You're supposed to kind of scrape there's a number of different ways to prepare them, apparently. Probably a lot of recipes out there, but you're supposed to scrape the flesh off of the leaves with your teeth, and then there's a fuzzy bit that you take off that's between the leaves and the base of the flower, and then you eat the base of the flower, I guess. According to CaliforniaGrown.org, they are California's state vegetable. So the more you know. They're grown mostly on the Central Coast. And MyKindOfItaly.com has an article from 4/23/2021, which says that they're one of the world's oldest cultivated vegetables and originated in Sicily or southern Italy. So that's Joe's ancestral homeland there. They have some benefits. They're drought tolerant. They don't need a lot of watering. Okay, I found conflicting information about that because, foodprint.org said they actually do need a lot of irrigation. So I don't know who to believe. I'd have to go through and take a poll or something. But, they thrive in poor soil and have deep roots preventing erosion. So that's nice. They're also a perennial, so you don't have to, dig up the soil and hoe it and harrow it and all this stuff, every single year. It's one and done. Plant them and they'll keep coming back. And they attract pollinators, of course. And the deep roots prevent soil from dry. Oh, no, the ground cover prevents soil from drying, too. So, and let's see, the leaves and stalk can either be used as animal fodder or to make ethanol, bioethanol. So that's potentially useful anyway if it's handled right. Drawbacks, according to foodprint.org. They tested them and they contain moderate pesticide residue as vegetables go, according to the Environmental Working Group Shopper's Guide to Pesticides in Produce. So, they're neither the best or the worst out there, apparently. According to Vegetable Literacy by Deborah Madsen, they are a monocrop and are heavily sprayed with pesticides. So that would be a drawback, even though I guess they probably don't need as much fertilizer because they can grow in poor soil. So yeah, do they still even have these in groceries, Joe? Grocery stores?
I haven't seen one in a long time, but finding out that they're from Sicily may explain why I've always loved them. I think they're delicious. And I think carciofi, I think, if my Italian is...
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, they're kind of a cool and interesting vegetable. Well, maybe someday I will have them again. I can't remember. I think I did not hate them when I was 10 years old,
Oh, well, that's something.
As far as I can remember.
Yeah.
It was not like a huge traumatic food experience or anything like that.
Oh, good. Yeah. 10-year-olds are very hard to please. So, yeah. Okay.
True.
All right. Well, thanks, Rebecca. All right. So get over that cough, and hopefully we'll see you back in the studio next week.
Okay. You don't want me to hang around necessarily?
Well, let's see. We could get some other callers. Yeah, you can hang around.
Okay. If I start to cough again, I'll hang up.
All right. Fair enough. Okay. Time for ecological news. And our first story, speaking of spraying herbicides and so forth, this is a story actually from France 24, which is France's version of PBS. It's the public news station in France. And the story on March 7th on YouTube, actually. And it turns out that Israel is spraying herbicides on Syria. They've all along the border on a 60-mile range, they are spraying herbicides and killing basically all the plant life, including all the agricultural fields of the Syrian farmers. And people in Syria are very upset about it, naturally, and they think it might be a prelude to Israel trying to expand its borders into Syria. It's just a reminder that, this sort of conflict, regional violent conflicts also have ecological consequences. And actually, this actually violates the Geneva Convention, because it is an international rule of war in terms of international laws governing wars, that you're not actually allowed to destroy the food sources, salt the fields, burn your enemy's crops. And so this is, being watched by a group called Pax for Peace. They're documenting it, and they've put videos up. And France 24 is a pretty well respected journalist source. It's not like a weekly rag or something. It's literally the national news of France. So Israel, stop that. Okay. All right. Next story. Nature.com, and we're going to keep on sort of the agricultural and diet stuff for a bit here. This story was on February 27th. Vegetarians have lower cancer risks on 5 different types of cancer. It's very interesting. They had a study. They looked at the diets of 1.7 million people across 3 different continents and a whole bunch of different countries. So they sort of, that sort of winnows out things like regional diets and local environment by looking at 1.7 million people. And so they just looking at diet, it turns out vegetarians have a 31% lower chance of multiple myeloma, a 28% lower chance of getting kidney cancer, 21% lower chance of pancreatic, 12% less chance of prostate cancer, and 9% less chance of breast cancer. So that's really interesting. And they actually divided the study group up into 5 groups. They looked at vegetarians, vegans, pescatarians, people who will eat fish but no other kind of meat, poultry eaters, which are people that will eat meat but not red meat, and then, of course, meat eaters. And it was also kind of interesting because the pescatarians also had lower breast and kidney incidences of cancer, and the poultry people, the people who eat everything but red meat, they had lower prostate cancer risk. But it actually turns out that vegans have a higher rate of colorectal cancer, which seems really counterintuitive. The researchers think maybe there's some sort of diet deficiency that's leading to higher rates of colorectal cancer. And vegetarians have a higher rate of esophageal cancer, cancer of the esophagus, which I don't know. They're thinking maybe maybe a nutrient deficiency, or could be something about the diet irritates the esophagus more. That's not known. That more research is needed, but the trigger in terms of having the higher cancer risks if you're a meat eater seems to be about 18 ounces of red meat. So if you eat more than a pound, like more than a pound and 2 ounces of red meat a week, then your risk for all those cancers is higher than it is for vegetarians. So interesting little story with a lot of ecological, the vegetarian diet is better for the planet because we spend a lot of energy. We have a lot of resources tied up in raising cattle. In fact, we've reported before that the biomass on our planet of cattle, of livestock, is actually higher than the biomass of humans. So there's more cows and goats and sheep than there are in terms of mass than there are humans on the planet. So the more we cut back on that, the better it is in terms of everything. All right, next story. Little worrisome story here. It's a little bit political. It's kind of on the borderline. It's Inside Climate News on March 8th, 2026. And the title is the FBI Investigating Environmental Activists? And they were basically talking with people from two groups, the Extinction Rebellion and Climate Defiance. And both those groups are environmental groups that practice social disruptions. So they're committed to nonviolence. They make that like front and center. But these are the people that will go and disrupt things. Like they disrupted a meeting a congressman had a few weeks back. He was giving a speech at a synagogue, and they disrupted that. Lee Zeldin was at another synagogue where he first announced that the EPA was going to get rid of the endangerment finding, and there were people from this climate defiance at that, and they took turns basically standing up and saying, why getting rid of the endangerment finding is so bad, and how he was hurting the environment. And so they disrupted his speech. One thing they point out in this article is that in the U.S., this kind of civil disobedience is actually quite unpopular, but they're suggesting that maybe the FBI is starting to preemptively target these groups because they know there's actually not a lot of support amongst the general population. Usually people, don't like to see things disrupted, even when evil people like Lee Zeldin are announcing really terrible policies. And so what often happens is, when regimes start doing political repression, they start with the least popular groups, and then they kind of move on from there to everybody. And so Inside Climate News is basically raising a red flag there. So keep an eye on that. Next story, we're going to go back to talking about Fukushima for a little bit. Asahi Shimbun is the news outlet that covers Asia, and they had a story on March 10th, and the title is Expert Group, Fukushima 2051 Decommission Goal Impossible. And essentially what this is a group of experts and Fukushima residents that was formed back in 2019 to sort of be a watchdog over what TEPCO and the federal government were doing about the Fukushima disaster. And they have been talking to the experts and looking at the situation. And both TEPCO and the government have always said this cleanup will be done by 2051, which, 40 years. of cleanup. But this group of experts is saying that's physically impossible. And they point out that they've only recovered 1 gram of the core so far that of the melted reactors at Fukushima, and that there's over 880 tons. So if you get 1 gram out in 15 years, you're not going to have 880 tons out by 2051. In fact, their estimate is it will take at least 70 and probably 170 more years before they actually manage to clean up Fukushima, because they actually still don't know how to do it, and they don't have a place to put it. Although Japan is looking at one of their islands, one of their island territories in the Pacific, which looks like a very bad idea because it's a very low-lying island and would probably be inundated by sea rise. So anyway, there was that. So that's kind of a depressing nuclear story, but let's go over to Germany to get a little bit of upbeat stuff. This is a story in DW, Deutsche World, or Deutsche Welt. Excuse me. Rebecca, you know the correct. Are you still there? Oh, we seem to have lost Rebecca. All right.
Sorry.
Yeah, what's the German public radio, public station, public Deutsche?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. Okay, never mind.
Bund, or I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right. Well, anyway, they released a story on Fukushima Day on March 11th. Germany won't return to nuclear power, Chancellor says. And that is the Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz. And he says that a return to nuclear energy in Germany is impossible, quote, impossible, unquote. And which is wonderful news, because Germany has been getting a lot of pressure from right-wing political parties that say we should turn nukes back on everywhere. And Germany, made the decision to terminate nukes way back in the year 2000 when the German Greens first got into parliament. And then they backed off from that because a right-wing government got in and they were like, oh, no, we don't really need to get rid of nukes. And then Fukushima happened in 2011, and Angela Merkel, who was the chancellor of Germany for many, many years, was like, okay, all right, we will get rid of it. And so they've been on this steady plan. This was all well thought out, and they had replacement power lined up, and, they made sure that the people who were working in the plants weren't just turned out on the streets, that there were ways that they got employed after they closed the nuclear plants. And the problem is that the EU and France have been pushing Europe back towards nuclear, because France is mainly dependent on nuclear. And the current head of the EU, Ursula von der Leyen, is actually, she's the daughter of a right-wing German politician who pushed nuclear through his whole career and actually tried to open up a village in his province, the village of Gorleben, to be a nuclear waste dump. And he was defeated. There was a great public outcry, people saying we don't want radioactive waste in our village. But she apparently has hung on to this idea that nuclear is somehow a good and viable energy source. And under her leadership, the EU has set aside development money for nuclear power plants in the EU. So good on Germany, basically, for sticking to their guns and realizing, especially in this current environment with war going on in Russia, and there have already been many close calls with the Ukrainian nuclear plants. Drones have actually taken out transformers. Some drones have actually damaged parts of nuclear plant facilities. We haven't had a meltdown yet because they've turned off most of those nuclear plants in order to, basically, if they were to get hit by a German or by a Russian bomb, they don't want them to melt down, because that would, again, create a Chernobyl exclusion zone. That would create another uninhabitable area forever, and it would contaminate Europe as well, which would probably cost Ukraine some allies if radiation from your nuclear plants is falling on on your neighbor's country, they're not going to be inclined to like help you. So just a good news story from Germany that they've reaffirmed the fact that they've left nuclear forever and they're not going back, just like Taiwan did last year. And let's hope that trend continues. More countries are leaving nuclear power than are turning towards it for the first time. And of course, we always have to remember that only about 30 out of the about 200 countries in the world have nukes at all. So they're completely unnecessary to maintain a 21st century lifestyle. So, okay, enough about that. So finally, I wanted to do some quick updates on a number of stories that we've been following. One is SB 294. That is the law that declares that all power sources approved by the Ohio Power Siting Board have to be, quote, reliable, unquote. And they defined reliable as having more than a 50% capacity factor. That means that they're running full power more than half the time. And of course, neither wind nor solar have a 50% capacity factor. They just don't, because for the wind, often things will be puttering along at 30, 50, 40, 50%, and that is plenty to make back the money and provide lots of power. That's how Iowa gets 70% of its electricity from wind turbines that are operating at 35, 40% capacity factor. So A, that's unnecessary, and B, for like solar, it's impossible because, as you know, the sun goes down and solar panels don't generate while the sun is down. And so this law, SB 294, would effectively outlaw wind and solar in Ohio. And it's in the Senate right now, and the Senate is considering it. So if this is something that interests you, it's time to get on that. Speaking of solar, Bowling Green's the controversy over Bowling Green's solar panel penalty has heated up again. Essentially, I went to the council because we used AI to analyze the city's charter, and the city council has claimed that they don't have any authority over the municipal utility board, but our analysis of their charter says they in fact do, because they can make ordinances that the municipal utility board has to follow. So we suggested an ordinance that basically says that the utility board can't pass a regulation that penalizes rooftop solar. And unfortunately, their response as a council has been to double down on defending the penalty. The city is actually spending tens of thousands of dollars to defend this penalty, even though the city only makes about $200 a month penalizing the solar panel owners. And so because there's so few of them, they only make $200 a month. So it's going to take like a decade to make back the money they've already spent on lawyers defending their penalty. But the economics of it hasn't stopped them. But there's going to be another meeting on Monday of the city council, and a fair number of people have said they're going to show up and talk to the council about removing the penalty. So let's hope they succeed. And the last, I just wanted to add a little bit of good news, finish on an upbeat note. The Ørsted, which is the company that is putting in a wind farm off the coast of Connecticut, that wind farm was stopped twice by President Trump using executive orders and extremely flimsy excuses. He just basically said, don't finish those wind turbines because I don't like wind turbines. Those executive orders have been overturned in court. The first one was overturned. He wrote another one. That one isn't yet overturned, but the judge said you can go ahead and finish the wind farm while I'm deciding if this is a legal executive order or not. And so those turbines are online. They're finally producing carbon-free electricity for Connecticut for hundreds of thousands of homes. And so take that, Donald Trump. That's it. That's it for our show. Thank you so much for listening. This is Joe DeMare and Rebecca Wood, and we are signing off.
No more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No